You stand before the open door of a glowing mechanical box in your kitchen. You feel the artificial chill washing over your skin. You reach inside and pull out a sealed package of meat. You check the printed expiration date to guarantee your safety. You trust this cold machine completely to keep the invisible forces of decay at bay. How did your ancestors survive without this artificial winter in the middle of a scorching summer? For hundreds of thousands of years, there was no electricity to cool the air. There were no airtight plastic seals to stop the bacteria. There was only raw flesh exposed to the open air under a relentless summer sun. You might imagine a desperate and frantic race to consume a hunted animal before the maggots took over the carcass. You might picture scavengers eating rotting scraps in a permanent state of sickness and food poisoning. The reality of prehistoric survival in the heat is far stranger than you think. It is much more calculated. Your ancestors did not just fight helplessly against the forces of decay in the summer. They weaponized the natural world to stop time itself. The summer's sun beats down mercilessly on the dry earth. You feel the blistering heat radiating from the ground beneath your bare feet. You and your hunting party have just brought down a massive wild horse. You stand beside a mountain of muscle and fat weighing well over 1,000 pounds. You cannot possibly consume this much food before the sun ruins it. The ambient temperature is hovering around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. What do? The clock is already ticking loudly in the background of your survival. The moment an animal stops breathing, its immune system completely shuts down. The microscopic barrier between life and decay instantly vanishes. Bacteria that were once trapped in the gut begin to multiply exponentially and migrate outward into the muscle tissue. Flies can smell the blood from miles away on the dry summer wind. They arrive within minutes to lay thousands of tiny eggs in the exposed flesh. Enzymes inside the muscle cells begin to digest the tissue from the inside out in a process called autolysis. If you do nothing, this massive source of life-giving energy will become a deadly biohazard by tomorrow morning. You must act immediately. You pull out a sharp piece of chipped flint. You begin to slice the animal open to remove the internal organs. You do not have the luxury of tossing anything away. You must preserve every single calorie. But how do you save food when the environment itself is actively trying to destroy it? Dr. Ruth Blasco and her team of archaeologists discovered the incredible answer at a site called Qesem Cave in Israel. They excavated layers of earth dating back 400,000 years into the Middle Pleistocene. The climate in this region was incredibly hot and arid during the summer months. Meat left out in the open here would become toxic rapidly. The researchers found thousands of bones from fallow deer scattered throughout the ancient cave floor. But these bones were not smashed open immediately for their rich and highly nutritious marrow. They were left completely intact. The researchers placed these bones under powerful microscopes to examine the surfaces. They noticed very distinctive cut marks and tool scratches on the dry bone shafts. Your ancestors were using the bones themselves as natural tin cans to survive the summer heat. You might wonder how a bone can act like a tin can. You have to understand the brilliant anatomy of the preservation method. Your ancestors left the thick skin and the dried connective tissue wrapped tightly around the ends of the bone shafts. This created an incredibly strong and airtight natural vacuum seal. The thick bone wall acted as a perfect physical barrier against oxygen and destructive summer insects. The marrow hidden inside this bone vault remained completely fresh and highly nutritious. The researchers tested this prehistoric method in modern laboratory settings. They discovered that the marrow stayed perfectly safe to eat for up to 9 weeks in sweltering room temperature conditions. Can you imagine storing raw animal fat in a hot cave for over 2 months and eating it safely? They simply cracked the dry bone open with a heavy stone when fresh food became scarce later in the season. This was not some primitive accident born out of ignorance. This was a deliberate and brilliant piece of food technology. Your ancestors understood the concept of airtight sealing hundreds of thousands of years before the invention of glass jars or metal cans. You must also understand the deadly problem of eating fresh meat in the summer. You have been conditioned to believe that fresh lean meat is always the ultimate goal for a healthy diet. You probably avoid eating fat because modern society tells you it is unhealthy. Your ancestors had a completely different relationship with human nutrition. Dr. John Speth is an anthropologist who revolutionized our modern understanding of prehistoric diets and survival strategies. He studied how indigenous populations managed their protein and fat intake during extreme seasonal shifts. He discovered a massive and deadly problem with eating too much fresh lean meat during the hot months. Animals lose a significant amount of their body fat during the stressful heat of the summer. If you hunt these animals and eat nothing but their lean muscle, your human liver cannot process the high levels of nitrogen fast enough. You will quickly suffer from a dangerous condition known as protein poisoning. This condition is also known historically as rabbit starvation. How do you survive a hot summer when all the available animals are lean and lack the essential fat your brain needs? You have to preserve the precious fat separately. You have to extract every drop of grease from the bones and store it. You take the shattered bones and boil them in a skin pouch filled with water using heated stones. The rich yellow fat rises to the surface of the hot water. You carefully skim this liquid gold off the top and let it cool into a dense block of tallow. Bacteria cannot easily grow in pure fat because there is no water for them to thrive on. You wrap this precious fat in large green leaves and bury it deep in the cool earth at the back of a cave. This fat will be your ultimate energy source when the lean meat makes you sick. But what do you do with the hundreds of pounds of lean muscle left on the carcass? You cannot boil it all. You cannot eat it all. You must remove the one thing that bacteria desperately need to survive and multiply. You must remove the water. You slice the lean muscle into incredibly thin strips using your razor-sharp flint blade. You drape these red strips over the branches of a dead tree or across a framework of animal bones. The dry summer wind and the blazing sun begin to aggressively pull the moisture from the flesh. You are making the absolute first version of what modern people call jerky. The physics of this process are incredibly simple but devastatingly effective. Bacteria require a moist environment to break down proteins and multiply. When you expose the thin strips of meat to the relentless summer sun, you are rapidly evaporating that required moisture. The meat begins to shrink and turn a dark leathery brown. The surface becomes hard and impenetrable to flies. Within a few days, the meat is completely desiccated. It weighs a fraction of what it originally did. You can now pack this dried protein into leather bags and carry it with you across the hot landscape for months without any fear of it spoiling. But sun drying alone is not always enough if the summer humidity is high. Sometimes the air holds too much moisture and the bacteria win the race. How do you stop decay when the air itself is heavy and wet? You bring the power of fire into the preservation equation. You build a slow-burning fire using green wood and damp leaves. You are not trying to create heat to cook the meat. You are trying to create thick, choking smoke. You construct a wooden rack above the smoldering fire and lay the strips of meat across it. The thick white smoke billows upward and envelopes the raw flesh. You might think the smoke just adds flavor. You would be completely underestimating the complex chemistry of what is happening. Wood smoke contains hundreds of different chemical compounds. Two of the most important compounds are formaldehyde and certain types of phenols. These chemicals act as powerful natural antimicrobial agents. They settle on the surface of the meat and create a highly toxic microscopic shield that instantly kills bacteria and repels insects. The smoke also contains acidic compounds that lower the surface pH of the meat, making it a hostile environment for any spores trying to land. The gentle heat from the smoldering fire simultaneously dries the meat from the outside in. You are slowly transforming the raw muscle into a biologically stable food source that can survive the hottest and most humid summer weeks. You do not need a modern chemical laboratory to achieve this. You only need the deep ancestral knowledge of how different types of wood burn and how smoke interacts with living tissue. You sit by the smoking rack and watch the meat change color over several days. You have secured your protein. But your human brain requires more than just dried muscle and stored fat. You crave sweetness and immediate energy. You crave a preservative that is created by insects rather than destroyed by them. You look up at the towering limestone cliffs shimmering in the summer heat. Dr. Alyssa Crittenden is a nutritional anthropologist who has spent years studying the dietary habits of the Hadza people in Tanzania. The Hadza are one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer populations on Earth who live in extreme heat without modern refrigeration. She documented their intense reliance on wild honey. Honey is not just a food source. It is an ancient and miraculous preservation substance. Deep inside the cave of the spiders in Spain there are prehistoric rock paintings dating back 8,000 years. These ancient paintings depict human figures risking their lives to climb high into the trees and cliffs surrounded by swarms of angry bees. They are risking death to harvest wild liquid honey. Why is honey so incredibly valuable to your ancestors in the summer heat? You must look at the exact chemical structure of this golden liquid. Honey is essentially a supersaturated sugar solution. It contains so much sugar and so little water that it creates a powerful osmotic pressure. If a destructive bacterium lands in a pool of honey, the sugar immediately sucks all the water out of the bacterial cell. The bacterium simply dehydrates and dies on contact. But that is not the only chemical weapon hidden in the honey. When bees collect nectar, they add a specific enzyme from their stomachs called glucose oxidase. When this enzyme breaks down the sugars, it naturally produces hydrogen peroxide. Yes, that is the exact same chemical you use to disinfect modern wounds. The honey is constantly generating a low-level amount of bleach that sterilizes anything it touches. It also has a naturally low and acidic pH level. You can take fresh summer berries that would normally rot in a day and drop them into a leather pouch filled with wild honey. The honey completely seals the berries away from oxygen and permanently preserves them. You can eat those exact same summer berries safely in the dead of winter. But what if you cannot find enough honey and you do not have time to smoke the meat? What if you are on the move across a blistering hot savanna? You must use the most abundant resource available to you. You must use the dirt beneath your feet. It sounds counterintuitive to modern hygiene standards. You have been taught that dirt is the ultimate source of contamination and disease. But the earth can be a powerful shield against the extreme summer heat. You dig a deep hole in the ground where the soil is significantly cooler than the ambient air above. You take the large cuts of meat and wrap them tightly in the fresh stomach lining of the animal you just hunted. The stomach lining acts as a tough natural plastic bag. You bury this package deep in the cool soil. The lack of oxygen in the buried hole stops the aerobic bacteria from multiplying rapidly. The cooler temperature of the deep earth slows the enzymatic breakdown of the tissue. You have created a rudimentary underground cooling chamber. It will not keep the meat fresh forever like a modern freezer, but it will buy you the precious days you need to consume the food before it becomes toxic. You can also use the ashes from your previous campfires. You take the cold gray wood ash and rub it heavily into the surface of the raw meat. You cover every single exposed fiber with the dry dust. You might think this ruins the food entirely, but you are performing a highly sophisticated chemical treatment. Wood ash is extremely alkaline. It has a very high pH level. Most of the bacteria that cause meat to spoil and rot require a neutral or slightly acidic environment to survive. When you coat the meat in alkaline ash, you are violently altering the surface chemistry. The bacteria simply cannot survive the extreme chemical shift. The ash also acts as a powerful desiccant. It aggressively pulls the moisture out of the surface of the meat, creating a hard, dry crust that flies cannot penetrate. When you are finally ready to eat the meat days later, you simply brush the ash away or wash it off in a nearby stream. The meat underneath is perfectly preserved and safe to consume. You have used the burned remnants of an old fire to protect the fuel for your own body. Let us recreate a specific day in the life of your ancient lineage during the peak of summer. You wake up on the edge of a vast and sun-baked prehistoric plain. The morning air is already warm and thick. Your group has successfully trapped a large wild boar. You drink the fresh blood immediately for vital salt and hydration in the heat. You slice the thin strips of muscle from the legs and begin the drying process on a rack of bones. You crack the heavy femurs open and extract the rich marrow. You boil the fat and store it in sealed animal bladders buried in the coolest part of a nearby rock shelter. You take the internal organs and clean them out thoroughly. You stuff the stomach with chopped fat and crushed dry berries. You cover the outside of the stomach casing with thick alkaline ash from the morning fire. You hang this ash-covered bundle high in the branches of a tree where the hot, dry wind can constantly circulate around it. You are not waiting for the food to rot. You are actively manipulating the moisture, the chemistry, and the oxygen levels to secure your future. This deep understanding changes how you look at the entire concept of food safety. The invention of agriculture is often called the greatest leap forward for our human species. But agriculture was a hidden trap. When you finally settled down to farm grains in the hot sun, you slowly lost this deep ancestral knowledge of natural preservation. You became entirely dependent on fragile seasonal crops that could fail at any moment. You became vulnerable to massive famines if a single summer harvest was destroyed by drought or locusts. You traded a diverse and incredibly resilient diet for a monotonous and fragile one. The modern obsession with absolute sterility has made your body and your immune system weak. You are terrified of a single speck of mold on your bread. You throw away perfectly good food because a printed date on a piece of plastic tells you to. You rely entirely on incredibly complex global supply chains and artificial cold air to feed yourself. If the modern electrical power grid fails in the middle of summer, your entire food supply will rot in a matter of a few days. You have completely forgotten the ancient pact your body once made with the natural elements. You have forgotten how to read the landscape for storage solutions. You have forgotten how to use the wind and the smoke and the earth to protect your energy. You have forgotten that your ancestors thrived for hundreds of thousands of years in extreme summer heat without a single electrical outlet or plastic container. The dangerous and hot world was their actual pantry. The intense elements of nature were their trusted preservation methods. Think about this the next time you open your refrigerator door. You feel the artificial chill against your face and look at the sterile light inside. You look at the carefully packaged dead food sitting quietly in clean plastic containers. You trust the printed numbers to tell you what is safe to put inside your body. You have entirely outsourced your human survival to a humming machine plugged into a wall. But the ancient genetic memory of a completely different way of living is still hiding inside your DNA. The expiration date printed on the side of your plastic milk carton is just a modern illusion.